Hi, my name is Trevor Klee, and this is the GMAT critical reasoning process. Um, so a bit about me, I scored 750 on the GMAT. I also scored 47 V on verbal. And as you can probably guess, I'm a GMAT tutor, and I've helped a lot of students score 40 plus on their own verbal sections. So this is something that I know quite a bit about. And so I want to talk about my critical reasoning process. In previous videos, I've discussed my sentence correction process. This is for critical reasoning. Um, Before I start, I want to talk more about my philosophy. So my philosophy with critical reasoning is that it's not really worthwhile to memorize sufficient, necessary, and logical flaws and all that sort of stuff. I don't think that's really helpful, and I think that's actually kind of harmful. It's like, what I found is when my students then try to tackle critical reasoning questions, they have all of these quote unquote knowledge in their heads, and they just can't really translate it to actually getting these critical reasoning questions right. So, my process is different and a lot simpler. So, my overall strategy is that I always understand the argument and then I try to pick the right answer. Which, when I put it that way, seems so simple as to be almost done. But I think it's actually really important. You have to understand the argument as an argument. So don't try to think of it as, a question at first or a problem. Don't get super worked up being like, oh, what's the right answer? Really look at what their argument is and try to understand it before you start looking at the answer choices. I think that makes a big difference and makes critical reasoning a lot easier. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at the process. So, if my overall strategy is understanding the argument and then picking the right answer, how do I understand the argument? Well, let's scroll down here. So, first step, find the conclusion and put therefore in front of it. So, the conclusion is going to be like an opinion or a prediction. I think that, I predict that this will probably happen. And so we want to put therefore in front of it to make sure, first of all, we're, finding something that's actually the conclusion and not some other part of the argument. And that second of all, we're really understanding the full conclusion. A lot of times my students will skim it or they'll try to paraphrase it or whatever, and I don't want you to do that. Don't skim the conclusion. Understand the whole thing. So once we've found it, one thing that you should be able to do with this conclusion is you should be able to disagree with it. If you find that you can't disagree with it, you probably haven't found the conclusion. All right. So our first step, we find our conclusion, our opinion, our prediction, our plan, and we put therefore in front of it. What's my second step? Well, I find my reasoning, which you might also have heard of as premises. And you put because in front of your reasoning. Because the premises, therefore the conclusion. So we want to understand how the author thinks the reasoning leads to the conclusion. So this is another really important step. A lot of times my students will just sort of have their conclusion and their reasoning, and they'll be like, okay, and they'll read it out to me, and they'll be like, all right, I'm ready to go. And it's like, well, no, how does the author actually think that right now his reasoning is supporting his conclusion? Because before we can like attack it or, find the assumption or whatever, we really have to understand it. So we really have to understand the reasoning leading to the conclusion first, and then we can start, addressing it like the question says. So we found our conclusion, we put therefore in front of it. We found our reasoning, we put because in front of it. We understand how the reasoning led to the conclusion. Then we want to identify any gaps. between the reasoning and the conclusion. So one thing is on the critical reasoning, we're never going to disagree with our reasoning or our premises. We just sort of have to accept them on faith. So instead, what we do is we disagree with the link between the reasoning and the conclusion. We can say, okay, well, I accept the reasoning, I accept your premises, your facts are what they say they are, but that doesn't necessarily mean they lead to your conclusion. You said because this, therefore this, but I have my doubts about the because. So this is when we're really identifying the gaps. And for weakened questions or assumption questions or anything like that, this will often just tell us the right answer if we're good at identifying the gaps. And then last, we read the question and we find the correct answer choice. So, this is, of course, sort of like step 3, draw the owl. But it really is important that my first 3 steps are all about understanding the argument. What's my conclusion? What are my premises or my reasoning? How do my reasoning relate to my conclusion? Why does the author think because this, therefore this? Are there any problems with what the author has said? And I think about all of that and then I can go to my answer choices. Because once I've done all this and once I've really thought about it, the answer choice should be really easy to find. So this is my overall critical reasoning process. I'm understanding the argument first as an argument, and then I'm looking at the right answer. So this is probably easier. You might think, oh, well, that's easier said than done, which is why I have some examples down here. Now, before I forget, I do have a book on critical reasoning, which you can find gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. It has a book with this process in action on a bunch of original, tricky critical reasoning questions. So they're totally original. They're tricky. I've explained them entirely, and they should really help you, understand how this process works and put it to work in your own studying. But with that in mind, let's go on to my examples. So these are some actual GMAT questions. So we're going to follow our process here. We're going to find the conclusion and then the reasoning and then understand how they relate to each other before I go on to the answer choice. So I've got my left side here. So ignore the right side for right now. Advertising by mail has become much less effective with fewer customers responding. Because consumers are increasingly overwhelmed by the sheer amount of junk mail they receive, most discard almost all offers without considering them. Thus, an effective way for corporations to improve response rates would be to more carefully target the individuals to whom they mail advertising, thereby cutting down on the amount of junk mail each consumer receives. All right, cool. So first step, where's my conclusion? Well, they already gave me my conclusion word here, thus, pretty close to therefore. So my conclusion is an effective way for corporations to improve response rates would be to more carefully target the individuals to whom they mail advertising. All right, so that's my conclusion there. So an effective way for corporations to improve response rates would be to more carefully target the individuals to whom they mail advertising. Cool. So therefore that, because consumers are increasingly overwhelmed by the sheer amount of junk mail they receive, which leads them to discard offers. And if we targeted individuals, we would cut down on junk mail. So we say, because consumers are overwhelmed by the amount of junk mail they receive, therefore, an effective way for corporations to improve response rates would be to more carefully target the individuals to whom they mail advertising. Conclusion, reasoning. Now, if you take a look at this, we've got some gaps here, which is mostly that I don't actually have any evidence for carefully targeting, right? I have no evidence that carefully targeting will improve response rates. All I have is that consumers are overwhelmed by junk mail. but I don't get any actual evidence that carefully targeting is going to improve response rates. I just get that the, sort of sending them a bunch of mail is not working. So let's see if I can get like if I want to strengthen this, I'm gonna need to sort of support that. If I want to weaken this, I want to point that out. So if I look down at my question, which of the following, if true, would most support this recommendation? So I want to support this. I want to say carefully targeting works. This could very easily be a weakened question, in which case I want to point out that carefully targeting might not work. It's really two sides of the same coin. All right. So which of the following, if true, would most support this recommendation? Their cost-effective means by which corporations currently advertise by mail could improve response rates. No, that has nothing to do with careful targeting. B, many successful corporations are already carefully targeting the individuals to whom they mail advertising. Okay, cool, but that doesn't say that careful targeting improves response rates. That just says they're doing it. C, any consumer who immediately after receiving an advertisement by mail merely glances at it is very likely to discard it. This is tempting, but it doesn't really say anything about response rates, right? And also, I don't know if carefully targeting is going to affect them merely glancing at it or not. All right, D, improvements in the quality of the advertising materials used in mail that is carefully targeted to individuals can improve the response rate for such mail. Okay, so again, this isn't super helpful here. This isn't super helpful because I don't get much information on, does carefully targeting actually improve response rates? All I get is that if you improve the quality of advertising materials, you improve response rates. And then E, response rates to carefully targeted advertisements by mail are considerably higher on average than response rates to most other forms of advertising. Okay, so this is pretty good. This says that carefully targeted advertisements by mail are have good response rates, right? So that's generally what I want. I want some sort of support for why I think careful targeting would improve response rates. E says carefully targeting advertisements by mail do have good response rates, at least compared to other forms of advertising. All right, cool. This one's pretty straightforward. So let's go on to our next one. So same thing again. We're going to read it. We're going to find the conclusion. We're going to find the reasoning. We're going to understand how the reasoning relates to the conclusion. We're going to point out if there are any issues. And then we're going to find our correct answer choice. So let's read it. According to the last pre-election poll in Whippleton, most voters believe that the three problems government need to address in order of importance are pollution, crime, and unemployment. Yet in the election, candidates from parties perceived as strongly against pollution were defeated, while those elected were all from parties with a history of opposing legislation designed to reduce pollution. These results should not be taken to indicate that the poll was inaccurate, however, since blank. So, what's my conclusion? Well, my conclusion is these results should not be taken to indicate that the poll was inaccurate. This is an opinion. It's backed up by the reasoning, right? And I've got the word should here, right? That's like an opinion word. You should do this. He should do that. That's an opinion. So that's my conclusion. I say, therefore, these results should not be taken to indicate that the poll was inaccurate because, and here I have pretty weak reasoning. I have, a poll says that most voters believe that the government needs to address pollution, crime, and unemployment. Let me fix that. Crime and unemployment in that order. But the people who were against pollution were defeated, and the people who were for pollution were elected. So I really don't have good reasoning right here, right? All I have is that the people who were against pollution were defeated, and the people who were for pollution were elected. And for some reason, we say, therefore, the poll was not inaccurate. So this is definitely needs some strengthening, because right now it doesn't make a lot of sense. My reasoning doesn't lead to my conclusion very well. And it's pretty obvious that it needs strengthening because I have since da-da-da. So I need an additional piece of reasoning. So let's get my additional piece of reasoning that would make my reasoning lead to my conclusion. So going on to my answer choices. Some voters in Whippleton do not believe that pollution needs to be reduced. Okay, fine, but this doesn't explain why the anti-pollution people were defeated if voters supposedly believe in addressing pollution. So no, most voters believe in addressing pollution. It's unclear why the anti-pollution people were defeated. B, every candidate who was defeated had a strong anti-pollution record. That's pretty much what I'd expect. Doesn't really solve anything. C, there are no issues other than crime, unemployment, and pollution on which the candidates had significant differences of opinion. Nope. D, all the candidates who were elected were perceived as being stronger against both crime and unemployment than the candidates who were defeated. This is pretty good, right? This would explain why the anti-pollution people were defeated and the pro-pollution people were elected, right? The poll wasn't wrong. It's just pollution is, more important than crime and unemployment separately, but maybe not more important than crime and unemployment together. So D would explain how the poll could still be right, even if all the anti-pollution people were defeated. And then E, many of the people who voted in the election refused to participate in the poll. No, so if they refuse to participate in the poll, that's still probably a bad poll, right? The poll would be inaccurate. The point of a poll is to figure out what the voters said, right? To figure out what most voters believed. So if most people didn't participate, that's just sort of suggesting that it might not have been a great poll. So no. So the only one that could say the poll was accurate about what most voters believed would be D. All right. So that is my GMAT critical reasoning process. I understand the argument as an argument, conclusion, reasoning, link between the reasoning and the conclusion, identify any gaps, and then go on to my answer choices. So I'll be doing some more videos on critical reasoning. If you want more videos, please like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to see more examples of this in action and also support me and my channel, please check out my critical reasoning guides. Gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. All right. Thank you very much, and see you on the next video.